Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, OnScreen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Rohrig. Hello, everybody, and welcome to OnScreen, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And we have a very special episode tonight. To celebrate our 25th episode, we're bringing back an old tradition from our last podcast. That was Advocates of Great Television. It's now renamed Advocates of Great Entertainment because we're covering more than just television with the subject matter. If you followed our old podcast, you should know very well what Advocates of Great Television is about and what this segment, Advocates of Great Entertainment, will in turn be about. But to sum it up, we each make a pick. We each pick something that we're passionate about with a category, and then we discuss that project, that show, or this, in this case, movie. And what we're doing this week is holiday movies. We each made a pick. That's our main topic for tonight. In addition, I've been going through a little thing where I've been watching a holiday movie every night, and I've included these two within my watching for this week so far. But I've watched like 4 other ones that I want to kind of talk about as well before we get started on our Advocates segment. And we're not going to cover any other news. We're not going to talk about what's coming up on the horizon. We're kind of ditching all of that so we can have an all holiday movie edition of this podcast on theme. So happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Let's kick things off with On Tap. What we've been watching. What we've been playing. What's on tap? On Tap is our segment where we talk about stuff that we've been watching. And this time, like I said, I'm just going to be talking about the 4 holiday movies that I've watched so far in my my month of holiday movies that I'm doing on the build up to Christmas. So first off, I watched Love Hard. Love Hard is a movie. It's got the. Did you ever watch Silicon Valley?
Not really, not yet.
Okay, well, anybody who's watched Silicon Valley, it's got the Chinese guy from Silicon Valley. That's like I don't have in my show notes any of the actors' names and stuff, but he's also in Crazy Rich Asians. He's been in a few other things, but basically he's the male lead, and then the female lead is, I can't remember her name either. Anyways, it's kind of a catfish story. So it's this woman, she writes about her bad luck and dating experiences, and everybody reads these articles and gets their schadenfreude from it. And she ends up like meeting a guy that she thinks is like really good, and she's really interested in him, and then finds out basically that she's being catfished when she goes out to surprise him by visiting him and his family on Christmas as like a big surprise, because they've been like kind of online dating for this whole time, only to find out she's been completely catfished. And it's this guy who doesn't necessarily, what's the best way to put this, conform to the stereotypical attractive male standards that she, you know, that the pictures he is posting were of, which was another guy that he was friends with as a kid. He basically put up pictures of his hot friend and then catfished her and was talking to her. And then she comes down and he basically says, you know, hey, for the first time, my family thought that I actually had a date and they were really happy for me. If you just pretend to be my girlfriend for this stretch of time, I'll help you get this guy that's like was my friend that you actually fell for because of his looks, you know? Okay. And obviously, you know where this is going. It's very like Cyrano de Bergerac, you know, very typical story trope kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, right.
Not necessarily a great movie. I kind of thought it was okay. I was watching it initially with my mom and sister. My sister got fed up. She just didn't like all the people that are too kind of generically attractive. She gets all fed up with that kind of stuff. So she didn't like it for that. And, you know, I was watching and I'm like, it does kind of have that kind of male fantasy kind of thing of like, oh, an unattractive man, like landing the perfect girl because she realizes that he actually has the personality that she's after kind of thing, which is very kind of cringy, I think, nowadays.
I mean, I'm cringy just listening to plot synopsis here. I'm just kind of like,
yeah, That's Love Hard. Not that great, but hey, I have to fill out a bunch of holiday movies. So next up, I watched the new movie this year, the new holiday movie this year that I was most excited to watch. And that's 8-Bit Christmas. We've talked about that before. We talked about the trailer for it. We talked about it when it was coming up on the horizon like a couple weeks ago. So I watched it.
So
have you gotten a chance to check out 8-Bit Christmas yet?
No, I don't currently have HBO. No.
Okay.
No, HBO Max or whatever at the moment.
It's all right. I don't think it was as good as what I was hoping it was going to be. I was really hoping that this would be kind of like our Christmas story.
I didn't expect that much from it.
I was hoping
my expectations are pretty mid. That
it would hit all the nostalgia for me, all the 80s nostalgia for me, and it really kind of didn't. Like it's okay. Right. It's an okay movie. It does hit some of the 80s nostalgia. It does have kind of like a sweet center to it that I kind of enjoyed. But otherwise, it's okay. It's not. It's one of those things where you watch it and you're like, they could have done so much more with this, if they really played into it. Like, I just don't. We don't get like really good Christmas movies anymore. It just doesn't happen anymore. Like when you look back and you go, what are the classic Christmas movies? The most recent ones you're going to hit are like the early 2000s. Anything in like 2010 on is going to be kind of like overly commercial, not really that good. Kind of just made for the moment, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Best. So unfortunately, 8-Bit Christmas didn't topple that. But the next two movies I watched are ones that I have seen before, but I just said, I'm going to rewatch these.
It's telling that, like all of like the go-tos are, before like the current or last decade,
Yeah. There's some in the early 2000s and that's about it.
Yeah.
There's some good ones in like the early 2000s, a few, not that many. And then it's just, it just becomes nothing but tired tropes after that. I really wish there was like decent, really good Christmas movies, ones that could hold. I think they're just not made to last anymore. Like they don't make a Christmas movie now that you're going to like want to watch like 10 years later. Like it's just kind of, it's disposable. It's like, oh, here's a Christmas movie. It's here and I'll watch it. And then that's it. I'll never watch it again. That's kind of where we are with Christmas movies these days. But so these next two movies are a little bit older. One of them's a little bit older. One of them's quite a bit older. So I watched A Very Harold and Kumar Christmas. Did you ever watch that?
No, I only watched the first two Harold and Kumar movies. So I really enjoyed the first one. I didn't really care for the one about them going to Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
And I guess by the time this came out, it was just kind of like, I don't know. Yeah.
The first one's easily the best in the series. This one's okay. It's got some fun bits and stuff. One thing that I had completely forgotten about is that this movie came out kind of when 3D was really taking off, like around the time Avatar and other stuff was coming out. But they, instead of doing like the kind of like deep 3D, like Avatar style or something, they were going for like the super gimmicky kind of like stuff being thrown at the screen. Like 3D. Which, I mean, it's a comedy, so that makes sense that you would go for kind of like that you overplay into that kind of thing. But when you're just watching it as a movie, it's like, it just gets kind of annoying after a while because you don't even get like the effect, So they went with some like gross out effects for those like 3D moments, but like you don't really even get that because it's not 3D when you're watching it at home on a regular TV. So that whole part's just gone. There's also a lot of kind of like over the top aspects that I don't know if they were necessarily that interesting, but there's some classic funny bits. There's some things even before I rewatched that I have a friend that I saw this with when it first came out, and we still quote like a few parts. There's like this waffle robot that hates pancakes, and we'll like quote that robot every so often, or we'll be like, pancakes suck, like looking at each other and quoting like little funny little bits from the movie and stuff. But just watching it again, it doesn't really hold up as well as I'd hoped it would. It's definitely not nearly as good as the first movie. And like I said, the 3D stuff kind of takes away from it a little bit, but it's still pretty funny. It's still got some funny parts in it. And then lastly, I watched, this is before we got into the movies we have for our Advocate segment, which I watched yesterday and tonight. I watched Edward Scissorhands. And this was like possibly going to be one of my picks for Advocates. But I ended up doing my initial pick because we ended up working out how we'd both be able to watch that, and it solved an issue. So I didn't end up doing Edward Scissorhands. But Edward Scissorhands, rewatched it. This movie came out in 1990, so it's just over 30 years old now. Of course, famous Tim Burton, Danny Elfman, Johnny Depp. Very classic, one of Tim Burton's most famous movies. And it's like a little fairy tale. It's kind of ridiculous. and over the top, but it fits when you take it into the context of being like a fairy tale. This is an example, though, of what you'll also get with your pick for advocates when we get to that is like, man, that like late 80s, early 90s stretch was a really interesting time for movies.
It really
when you rewatch them, it's like, wow, there's the kind of stuff that little flights of unrealism that you just would never see in a movie these days. You know?
Yeah, I was thinking that when watching Scrooge, it's like, this is a style of movie that you would never see made today.
Yeah, there need to be more explanation, more like information about why certain things are the way they are instead of just accepting them, you know?
Right.
That's like in the modern context, it just wouldn't work that way, you know, anymore. So it's a very special time for movies, that like late 80s, early 90s. It's just a weird time. And so that took a little bit getting used to, but you know, I've seen the movie before and it's got a lot of great things in it. I think one of the cool things about it is I live in California, in Southern California. Tim Burton went to high school in a town called Burbank, where my mom also grew up. And so it's an area I'm very familiar with. Like we still go out to Burbank every other month or so. We'll head out to Burbank and get some food and other stuff like that. But it's very like proto suburb, like early 50s suburb type town.
Okay.
If you've seen Edward Scissorhands and like that kind of look, that suburban look that movie has, I've
seen that from a trailer. I always assumed that was like kind of like, you know, like a parody, like fairy tale version of what a suburb is supposed to be.
That's where Tim Burton grew up. That's Burbank. It's quintessential Burbank. And it really kind of has that vibe. And, you know, being somebody who's like very creative and very different, that was something that clearly was something that he didn't quite gel with. Of course, Burbank is also like a major industry town. There's a lot of like movie studios and stuff in Burbank. So it's not too off that you'd have creative people in that area because there's creative industry there. But yeah, that kind of gives an explanation for kind of like the style for it. Edward Scissorhands himself is he's like an avatar for Tim Burton himself, like feeling like an outsider, you know, within the community he grew up in kind of thing. So
yeah,
it's a good movie. It's a little cringy now just because we don't.
When Tim Burton used to be good, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
It's a little cringy now because we don't typically like, you know, modern standards. We don't really like to indulge in like kind of pity parties,
right?
Ourselves, you know, and what we went through or something. That's not kind of something that's really commonplace now in entertainment. So that's a little off. But like I had to kind of remind myself a few times, like, yeah, you know, when I'd feel a little off about it, I'm like, but this is like a fable. This is like him expressing himself through a fable. And I was able to kind of enjoy it more doing that. But Edward Scissorhands, classic movie, great score. One of Danny Elfman's best scores too. So, and he also did your movie that we're going to talk about next in our next segment, which is Advocates of Great Entertainment.
Advocates of Great Entertainment. I'm here to kill chaos, bitches.
Yes.
So Advocates of Great Entertainment is our special segment we only do every so often. We don't try to do it too often. We try to make it for special cases. This time we're doing it because it's our 25th episode and because it's
the season.
It's the season. Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to do something kind of special. And so that's why we're doing Advocates on this episode. And we each picked a holiday movie to represent. And then we both watched both of those movies and we're going to talk about those now. Will, you're up first. Tell us about your pick.
So my pick is the 1988 Bill Murray comedy Scrooged, which is basically a parody of A Christmas Carol. It's one of those movies, like I saw this when I was a kid and I must have watched it like several times, you know, maybe like 4 or 5 times over the years. And it's one of those that got lodged indelibly into my brain, so much so. And I really enjoyed it. And it's been a long time since I even seen it. So when Tyson asked me to think of a Christmas movie to recommend for this, that was the first movie that popped into my head. Because I was like, I don't even need to think about it. I got the perfect movie. So what basically the plot of this is, mirrors A Christmas Carol because it is. Basically, Bill Murray plays a Scrooge-like character named Frank Cross, who is the president of a fictional television network.
IBC, which is
IBC.
They also make delicious root beer.
Yes, they make the best root beer. IBC, who make absolutely insane programming like Lee Majors and like Santa Claus fighting terrorists, and Robert Goulet, singing Christmas carols in the Louisiana swamplands and getting eaten by an alligator, apparently. So, like that's the kind of content these people make. And apparently one of the big things that they're doing is their centerpiece of their holiday programming for 1988 is apparently going to be like this elaborate, like live version of A Christmas Carol with like all these celebrities and crap. And like they got dancers, they got Mary Lou.
It's funny because that's something in like the last 5 years that we've been getting.
Yes. Yeah.
We've been getting these live musical adaptations. Like they're doing Annie this year,
They're doing so like in that it's weirdly modern in that way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the basic plot is apparently like this production is causing Frank Cross so much stress that he's just unbelievably, mean.
He's cracking.
He's cracking. He's mean and bitter to like literally everybody in this movie, to his poor assistant played by Alfred Woodard, to one of his employees who because he asked him to play the spot for the Christmas Carol, the live production, and they play it and it's normal, right? Unlike everything that you saw previously, this is like the most normal thing. And then he just basically says it sucks. And then he like shows them like one he made, and of course it's batshit insane. Yeah. Like it just shows like war,
people shooting up drugs and freeway shootings
and stuff. And then it like ends with the message like, if you're worried about any of these things, then you better watch Scrooge. It's like, what? Yeah.
It's this absurd thing, and of course like most of his staff are just a bunch of sycophants.
Yes.
Like, oh, that's great, but he's got one employee that kind of like says, I don't know if this is a good idea.
Yeah. Elliot Loudermilk, who is this mousy, like timid person being played by Bobcat Goldthwait, who Bobcat Goldthwait is a freaking legend. He has a great role in this movie, by the way. He questions it, he's like, it's like, it might be a little bit much. And there's a point where like, it looks like Frank is like agreeing with him and it's going to be like, I can tone it down. But then Frank turns around immediately and has him like fires him and has him escorted out of the building.
Yeah. And it's truly like he's even like watching him through a telescope in his office, like on the
and
corner
like
of
counting
street.
the minutes until like he's off the premises.
Yeah.
Right? He like says, 4 minutes. What a record. That's a new record. And like he has a list of people he knows and like business partners and employees that he's going through. And with like 2 gifts, there's either like a new state-of-the-art at the time VCR or a bath towel.
Yeah, IBC towel, yeah.
Yeah, and he's sending mostly everybody a towel, including his own brother and his assistant.
Including his assistant, that's, yeah.
Yeah. And actually, like, speaking of Bobcat Goldthwait's character, there's this great running gag where, like, he's trying to get some alcohol, and every time he goes to drink it, like, something happens. Like, the first time he has it, he gets water splashed all over him, and the bag gets soaked, and then, like, the bottle falls out the bottom of the bag and, like, smashes. And then there's, like, the second time where Frank is with the Ghost of Christmas Past. They're in a cab and they drive past Elliot. He's about to take a drink of some more like alcohol he got. And the Ghost of Christmas Past like snatches it out of his hand.
Yeah. He's not having a good day.
No, he's not having a good day at all. So there's that. And then the story mirrors A Christmas Carol pretty closely. In this case, Frank is visited by the ghost of his old boss, Lou, who used to be his boss when, he was not quite CEO of the company at that point. And I believe Lou was the former CEO. So Lou was in Frank's place before Frank took over. And basically, he plays the Jacob Marley role where he comes to warn Frank that he's going to be visited by 3 ghosts. And of course, we know it's the Ghost of Christmas Past, Ghost of Christmas Present, Ghost of Christmas Future. It's what they do with these ghosts, though, that like makes the movie shine. Because like the rest of the movie, they're just insane.
Yeah.
Like Ghost of Christmas Past of this movie is like this crazy cab driver who like drives really fast and smashes into crap and stuff.
It's interestingly played by David Johansen, who is the singer for New York Dolls, which was like a really popular punk band in the 80s and 70s.
Yeah.
So Ghost of Christmas Past is this insane cabbie, drives like a lunatic, and he takes him around and shows Frank all of these aspects of his past, going back into like the 50s when he was a kid and going into
the 60s when he was playing a dog on one of their kids' shows.
Yeah.
And he was trying to impress his boss, the CEO of the company, who back then was Lou Hayward.
A lot of this period of the movie, the Ghost of Christmas Past stuff, is about his relationship with a woman.
Yes.
That he hasn't talked to in like 15 years.
And he actually, he calls her like right after his first ghost encounter with the ghost of Lou. After he has that experience, he calls her.
Well, like the ghost calls and then he like grabs the phone.
That's true. Yeah.
And tries to talk to her when he realizes that it called. So it's mostly going through his kind of past in his relationship with her. And you see like how their relationship started, how he was very like an idealistic, nice person, and how it eroded as his ambitions got the better of him.
Yes.
And how he started just becoming a real asshole and then ended up losing her.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the past stuff is kind of focused largely on that. And then we go into the Ghost of Christmas Present, played by Carol Kane from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
Yep.
And she's very young Carol Kane. It's very interesting to see her and be so youthful.
Yeah, be so youthful. And also like she plays like a fairy, but it's like she's like a very like mean and abusive fairy.
Yeah.
Like
constantly kicking him in the nuts and stuff.
Kicking him. Yeah. She has a sign there when you first see her. It says like ball breaker or something in like the place where she's in. And like, yeah, she's like kicking him. She's smacking him. One point she goes to poke him in the eyes. Yeah, she's like dishing out all this abuse on Frank. And she basically takes him to see what's going on like with his family because they're gathered for Christmas and he's not there. Also like his assistant's family. His assistant that he's been treating really poorly and won't give her like her bonus, you know. And one of the things is like, and again, this is the Bob Cratchit, right, of the movie. Alfred
yeah, and her son is like Cratchit. The Tiny Tim parallel.
Yeah, her son is the Tiny Tim parallel. His thing is not that he can't walk and needs crutches. His thing is that he will not talk because of his father dying tragically. So he hasn't talked or spoken at all in years, and that's his thing.
Mm-hmm. Ghost of Christmas Present, showing his family, showing the Cooley family, which is his assistant's family, and showing the people in the homeless shelter where his love interest works.
Yes.
Showing all these different kind of people and kind of what's going on with them and kind of opening up his eyes. And that whole sequence ends with him basically being dropped into like a sewer.
Yeah, a sewer grate where he comes face to face with one of the homeless people, you know, that he met when he was visiting his love interest, you know.
Mm-hmm. Who's frozen to death.
Yes.
In the sewers. So he gets face to face with death, and then he breaks out of the sewer and somehow ends up like right on the set of where they're like building the set for Scrooged and getting ready and doing dress rehearsals.
And I gotta say, there are like these surreal moments throughout the movie where he's like seeing things, like visions of things. There's a part where he's having a meeting at a restaurant with this other guy, played by the guy from Smallville.
Yeah. You're talking about John Glover playing Bryce Cummings.
Yeah, Bryce Cummings. And the head of the network, Preston, you know, they're at this fancy dinner, you know, talk business, and he starts seeing things like an eyeball in the water he served, and then like a server, you know, like being set on fire, and only he could perceive those things, although they're not like really happening.
Mm-hmm. But he's freaking out like they are, and it's making himself look very unstable.
Yes. There are several scenes like that in between like the hauntings where he sees stuff. So that happens too.
By the time he breaks out of the sewer, ends up somehow stumbling onto the set of his production of Scrooge, he's like coming across as just flat out crazy.
Yes.
Like he's completely snapped and he's just kind of mumbling around on stage and bumping into people and just acting like a nut. And everyone's like, oh, what the fuck's going on with this guy, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
He ends up going to get into the elevator and he sees like this death-like figure and recognizes it as the Ghost of Christmas Future. But it's the Ghost of Christmas Future from the production that they're making.
Yeah, it's the actor from the production they're doing, which he confuses for the real Ghost of Christmas Future.
He has a little freak out moment.
Yeah.
He ends up getting back, going to his office, and then he's about to be confronted by the actual Ghost of Christmas Future. You see it like coming through the screens behind him.
Yeah, really cool.
But then it pulls back because he gets interrupted by another surprise visitor.
Yeah, Elliot Loudermilk, who had,
with a shotgun.
Yeah, with a shotgun, but apparently managed to get some liquor into him and then decided that he was not going to sit down and take his firing on his back, apparently. He says, like, his wife left him. When he's first fired in the movie, he, like, says to himself, he's like, oh, I'm just going to have to tell my wife that we'll have to move into a studio apartment and hope she's okay with that. And apparently now she was not okay with that.
She leaves him and he's like just all fucked up. And so he's acting very Elmer Fudd-ish, going after Frank. And just kind of just shooting up his office and going on the warpath after him.
Frank manages to escape into an elevator, but as soon as he gets into the elevator, he's confronted finally by the real Ghost of Christmas Future, who he
this time he confuses for the one
for the actor. Again. Yeah. It's like the opposite.
But he opens up his cloak and you see like Ghost within the things like ribcage and stuff.
The screaming souls and stuff and the rib cage. He's like, oh. And like the Ghost of Christmas Future in the novel, this one is also, a Grim Reaper type who is, silent. He doesn't have like any wacky personality like the other two. The only difference really is like you see like his face is like a TV screen, so it shows like different things.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only real difference, as far as I know. But like it shows them potential future. If he stayed the course, see what happens. He finds like the young boy there, Calvin. Calvin ends up institutionalized, and his love interest ends up being a very cold and cruel person.
Yeah,
Claire ends up being a very cold and cruel person.
She recalls something that he had said to her about saying scrape them off like they're on the bottom of your shoe or something.
Yes.
Talking about like other people, like if you want to help people, help yourself kind of thing. So she took that to heart somehow and ended up just becoming, very cruel. Very Karen-esque.
Very.
And so she ends up kind of taking on that role. And then he also sees what he believes is his brother being dead.
Yeah.
But then his brother walks into the frame and he's like, oh, there he is. So who's in the coffin? And of course, that's the famous scene in the Christmas Carol book and play is that, it's him.
Yeah, it's him. Scrooge realizes
he gets not only just, is he in the coffin, but then he appears inside the coffin as it's being put into a cremator.
Yeah, as he's being burned alive. And he's screaming, don't burn me, don't burn me. And then he comes back and immediately
he's like, I'm alive. And then the shotgun goes right to his face.
That's okay, because he grabs Elliot's gun and promises to give him his job back, even better.
Yeah, it's just double your wage and
any office
up here.
You want. Yeah.
He's like, and I'll give you an office up here. Do you like my office? And he's like, no.
He's like, no.
So then he goes down, interrupts the live broadcast of Scrooge, which is what they're calling A Christmas Carol, their live broadcast, interrupts it and just starts going on this rant or something about being good to each other on Christmas. And Elliot, who, had the shotgun to his head just a moment ago, is now holding John Glover's character Bryce at gunpoint in the control room at gunpoint to not turn off the live feed of this play, as Frank is going on this rant. And so you get to see different people observing the rant, like his current boss, who's oh, I'm going to fire you, at first. And his love interest, Claire, who's kind of endeared by him doing this and, ends up leaving to run to go to the studio to him and stuff. And
yeah,
I mean, that's pretty much it. The movie is just kind of him making that positive turn on live TV and kind of turning all these people that kind of hate him at the studio and stuff into fans of his, basically.
And Calvin,
what he's saying, and then
Calvin
Claire
finally speaks. He says the line, God bless us, everyone, which isn't and the way that's played off is it isn't something he pulls out of his ass. They very deliberately show him Well, first he's watching the movie version, the classic movie version of A Christmas Carol at home.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees like the Tiny Tim scene where he says that. And then there's a second scene where he's watching the rehearsal and Mary Lou Retton says it. And, you know, it zooms in on his face. The point is, like, he's inspired to say that because, like, he's inspired by that character, you know?
Yeah. The way he says it, he doesn't just like shout it out to everybody. He like
no,
he says like you're
quietly.
Forgetting something to Frank's character. He says, "What am I forgetting?" And he said, "God bless us, everyone."
Yeah, he says it like very quietly, like kind of like a cracked, broken voice of somebody who hasn't used it in like a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's the miracle moment of the ending.
Yeah, and that's it. Then they're all singing a song together. I already forgot what it was.
Oh, come on. Put a little love in your heart.
That's it, yeah. I just watched this before, like, literally, like, I watched this movie, got some food, and then came up and started podcasting and already forgot the song that was playing.
So what do you think of the movie, like, overall thoughts?
Like I said, that period, that late 80s, early 90s period is really a special time.
Yeah.
Watching it now by, like, today's standards, I'm like, God, there's a lot of stuff here that's pretty wonky. And I don't even just mean, like, effects and things that, you know, are just of the time and you can't help. But, like, there's a lot of things that I'm like, ooh, that's just weird choices, you know? There's a lot of, like, Frank's mannerisms and stuff, even before he started really cracking, that are just kind of, like, weird and way over the top.
I was watching it, and I think a lot of that performance is ad-libbed by Bill Murray, because there's a lot of it that seems like just Bill Murray coming up with it on the spot. A lot of very Bill Murray-isms, especially like a lot of the jokes Frank cracks throughout the movie seem like very Bill Murray.
Well, the other thing is that, like, the writers of the movie, I think, were both involved in, like, Saturday Night Live, which Bill Murray was also in the original cast for Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And, you know, the whole IBC channel thing is very clearly a parody of NBC.
Yeah.
Right? It's literally
definitely.
International Broadcasting Company over National Broadcasting Company.
Yes.
So it's really got that. And just kind of like the whole live show is Saturday Night Live, you know, doing a live show kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
So there's like those parallels to kind of that, you know, that are very evident, which is weird because like the movie's kind of half plays as a comedy and half plays more like seriously. But even when it's serious, it's got kind of like the mannerisms of a parody, you know?
Yes. Yeah, this is a zany comedy, but it's not Airplane. It's not something like that.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't go that hard. You know, but
it's also not played as straight. Like Airplane is it's like really weird, but played kind of straight. And this is kind of played more goofy.
Yeah, this is played more goofy, but like the serious moments are played seriously.
Except Bill Murray's characters and the way his mannerisms and stuff are very still.
Yes, yeah.
Kind of over the top and weird. Like I was saying, like it's one of those things, like I was saying about a lot of the Christmas movies I've been watching, where you have to kind of like, as you watch it, you have to kind of remind yourself of the era. You're watching it, it's like, oh, this performance is way over the top. And then you're like,
it is.
But this is late 80s. This is like a different time.
Also, like I said, I think like it's just Bill Murray was having fun with it.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big part of it too. Bill Murray was just reveling in that character and being that character. And I think that's what you're seeing on the screen there.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I guess there's not too much else to say. One thing I will say is this was directed by Richard Donner, who passed away earlier this year.
Sadly, he was a legend.
Yeah,
in addition
he did Lethal
to this,
Weapon and Superman,
the Goonies, you know, like all these classics that people go back to. And it's kind of weird to me that like this isn't considered more of a classic. I don't know. I think it's a great movie.
I think it's a bit too weird to fit into his normal repertoire of movies.
Yeah, perhaps.
But yeah, like I said, like I had to remind myself a few times, like, okay, this is from a certain era. This fits into a certain theme. This is certain players involved in this movie that I have to have expectations of, you know, like I have to understand what to expect from them and stuff to remind myself like why certain things are so weird and so off in like a different way, that like some of that's just for the era, but some of that's because of just the people involved in it. And also another thing that was in the 80s and 90s is like movie critics were much more straightforward.
Yes.
And so they didn't really have much tolerance for nonsense. So like I could see it just not being reviewed too well, and then it just doesn't hold up as much with the legacy.
Yeah, it didn't do too super well. I'm looking at Rotten Tomatoes. Apparently, right now it has a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't bad. It's fresh. Now, it's not rotten, but yeah, it's not like the best reviewed movie in the world either.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw this quote from a critic here, William Thomas of Empire Magazine. Murray doing what he does best, if you like that sort of thing.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So that is Scrooged. We're going to move on now to my pick. And my pick it's less known just because it's kind of a smaller movie, but it's
completely different in tone. That's for sure.
Very different in tone, but with a slightly similar lead.
Slightly. Yeah, that's the weird thing, right? We both pick movies with like male leads who are like obnoxious and hateful.
Yeah, or just very shallow in this case.
They're just very shallow, and then they turn around at the end, right?
Yeah. So my pick was About a Boy. It's a British movie, but it was directed by American directors, Chris and Paul Weitz, who did American Pie.
I read this in the notes and I was kind of surprised because this is like nothing like American Pie.
No. I mean, this is based on a book by Nick Hornby, who also did like High Fidelity, who wrote the novel High Fidelity. So he wrote the novel for this. And it was then adapted with Chris and Paul Weitz directing this movie, which is like a American book about a British kid. And so they filmed it within like an all British cast. And so it looks like it's a British movie. It's just a weird. Well,
I watched this. I thought this was 100% UK production.
Yeah.
All the actors are British.
It's a weird amalgamation, like it feels very British because it's like it is all British actors. And
by the way, Marcus, the teacher in like the one brief scene, I was like, that's the guy from Spaced.
Yeah.
It's the artist.
Yeah. Definitely. He had a very brief scene. Also, if you notice, the girl that he had a crush on was that wildling that was taking care of Bran in Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay.
He was also Nymphadora Tonks in Harry Potter.
Oh, okay.
That was weird. I didn't notice that. I've watched this movie a bunch of times. I didn't pick up on that until just this time watching it because it has been a few years. And I was like, wait a minute. I think that's her. And I looked it up and I'm like, oh shit, it is. Because she's so young in this. It's like weird seeing her so young. But I mean, and this is, probably
she was much
weird
older
for
by
you
Game of Thrones.
I watched this movie around when it came out. So at the time, like Nicholas Hoult hadn't done anything else, but I only knew him as the kid. So when I saw him in other stuff, like when I saw him like, oh, he's going to be an X-Men, I'm like, it's the little kid from About a Boy. He's going to be an X-Men. You're getting kind of the reverse of that, where you're like, wow, it's Beast and he looks really young and awkward.
Yeah, exactly. I did not watch this movie back in the day. I did not watch this at all.
Yeah.
So here's what I thought when the movie came out and trailers are playing. Here's what I assumed this movie was going to be. I assumed this movie was going to be, okay, Hugh Grant is a playboy. He's not responsible, blah, blah, blah. And then, he meets this woman and she has this quirky kid and the kid tries to set her up with his mom and they end up falling in love and he turns into like a better person because of this kid and the power of love. And that's not really, that's not really how the movie goes. It's like
this isn't a story
kind of, sort of, but it's not really.
It's not a love story. It's like it's a story about somebody kind of being adopted by a kid in a sense,
There is a romance plot between the main character and another woman in this, but it's almost like
it's secondary.
It's like a B plot. In fact, like Rachel Weisz, like the main, I was surprised. Rachel Weisz, like the main love interest in this movie, is only in like a handful of scenes and doesn't even have. She doesn't even show up
until like more than halfway through the movie, I think.
Yeah, more than halfway through the movie, she shows up, and again, she's not like a huge part of the movie.
Yeah. But everything else you described basically is like what the setup was, which is that this boy encounters this guy because he discovers, the main character, Will Freeman, discovers that the possible ideal woman for him would be a single mother. And the reason why is because they have other obligations, which means it's an easy breakup. Yeah. And it's great sex, little competition, easy breakup kind of thing. So it's these shallow reasons he decides to get involved and he ends up spinning all sorts of lies in doing so. He ends up
going to support for single mothers.
Yeah. It's single parents alone together.
Well,
Spat.
It's single parents, and unsurprisingly, it's all single mothers. He's the only father there, even though,
Yeah.
presumably the group is open to fathers. There are no other men in that group.
Yeah. It's all moms. And so he goes to this group, he finds a girl he likes, he goes on a date with her, lying that he has a son, and then saying like, oh yeah, my ex has custody of him this weekend, so that's why he's not around, kind of thing, so he can see her. He ends up going on a date with her, and she ends up bringing this kid along, who is the son of one of the other people in the support group that she's friends with. And this kid is Marcus, of course, the other kind of like main character of the movie. And you kind of see like their first introduction is basically Marcus realizing that this guy is like kind of full of shit, but going on this kind of thing with them and all. And then when the date ends, they go to drop Marcus back off at his mom's house, and she had attempted suicide. And it's like a really kind of hard event. And so Will's now caught up in this whole thing. He's like, he just went to go on this date, and now he's like driving to the hospital and stuff. That's where I said last week, I said like, I love the narration dialogue in this, because there's like dual narrators. It's like him and Marcus. It switches between them, like narrating what's going on. And I love like the part where, after the mom's like attempted suicide and she's in the ambulance, he's like, it cuts to him and he's following her in his car, and he's all, it's horrible, terrible, but driving behind the ambulance is really great. He's just so shallow. Like even in that moment, he's still thinking about that. So he's just kind of playing nice, like the character of Will is just playing nice to just, not be hated basically in this moment. Otherwise he would have just probably left a while ago. And because of that, Marcus kind of attaches to him. And Marcus realizes at a certain point, he's like, I can't have it just be my mom and I. Like, that can't be our family unit, because I need backup, because something like this could happen, and you need backup. And so he endeavors to, like, as you said, like what you thought it was going to be, to set up his mom with Will, which is just a horrible idea. And I thought that the whole part with it, the whole date scene or whatever, was hilarious. Like, and you get the split narration too, with Marcus saying like, oh, but she wore that great jumper, with the hair on it and stuff. And then it cuts to Will's narration. He's like, she was wearing some insane jumper. She just
yeah. And that's like one of the things like I liked about this movie is like we got like internal narration from both characters. So it wasn't just like one character narrating their thoughts. Like you don't see, I can't think of another example like of anything that had like dual narration like that. Like,
yeah, I mean, I've seen things that use multiple narrators, but it's usually more like structured. Like there was a TV show I was watching, and it's mostly narrated by one person, and then like occasional episodes that focus on other characters are narrated by other people, but this is like splitting back and forth, like it jumps back and forth between two different narrations.
Yeah, which was really cool, I thought.
Yeah, I really dug that. And then another thing that I remembered really liking after watching it, it's a little gag, and it does it a few times where it'll do like a freeze frame, like right before characters get hit in the head with something,
because like there's a scene near the beginning where Marcus is dropped off to school by his mother, and she says, like, I love you, and he says, I love you back to her, and then like all the kids start laughing and stuff, and then like something gets thrown at his head and they freeze frames. And then there's the scene at the very end when Will and Marcus are at the concert, and like everybody's like jeering them and stuff, and it shows like somebody in the audience throws something that's about to hit Will's head, and it freeze frames on his narration. So we see that like towards the beginning and again at the end, like the same thing.
Yeah, it's a funny little gag.
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed that. Yeah. And it just, I really I just think the movie, it's a really sweet movie, basically, about people kind of like finding each other, and in like not a romantic way, but just in the sense of
like I said, like this is, I guess by definition, this is a rom-com. I mean, there is a romance involved, but again, it's like kind of, that's like the B plot. Like, yeah, like eventually Will's character finds Rachel wise and wants to settle down and be with her and be serious. But that is not the main through plot. The main plot is Will's relationship with this boy and how that affects him and affects his outlook on relationships and the people around him. That is the main point.
You see just how insanely shallow he is at the beginning of the movie, and he's still largely shallow at the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's
now
not like
he's like open to certain people,
Yes. So. Yeah, he's more open to certain people. Yeah, it's not like he doesn't have like a come to Jesus moment like Frank does in Scrooged. He just has character growth, but there's still more room to grow even at the end of the film.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I picked this because it is one of my kind of favorite Christmas movies, and initially doesn't really even feel like a Christmas movie.
Why? Well, okay, I'm going to be a stickler here and say, like, this is stretching the definition of a Christmas movie just because one scene takes place at Christmas.
Two, because it takes place over like 2 years, and there's two.
Really? What's the
scenes.
Second Christmas scene? Oh, yeah. It's
first
at the
Christmas
end, right?
scene's like you see Marcus's dad and stuff in the first Christmas scene.
I remember that one. That was the big one. It's the second one at the very end, right?
The very end, yeah.
Yeah,
also at Christmas.
That was at Christmas. That makes sense. It's still kind of stretching it because like 90% of the movie takes place during not Christmas. but yeah.
It goes with Christmas themes though, because it's about like kind of, it's about family, but it's not necessarily about like the family you're born into or the family even that you make, but it's like the family you find. Kind of thing. And so like that's kind of a big part of like I think the Christmas aspect. Also like it's a theme throughout it because like, you know, one of the reasons the character of Will is so shallow and stuff, he doesn't do anything. He's like never worked.
Yeah, he doesn't have a job. At first, like you get to the scene in the park, you know, like where he's talking to this woman who's basically inconsequential. She was only a vehicle to get this boy and Will together. But anyway, he's talking to this woman and, you know, who he's trying to have sex with. And she asks him what he does, and he just says nothing. And she's like incredulous, and he just says like nothing. And that, like there was a moment there I'm thinking, okay, how do you have like a nice like apartment, all this nice shit, and how do you pay your bills? And then he explains because like his dad wrote like a song that like basically became like a one-hit wonder, like a hit. And apparently he gets residuals every time that song's played, and must be played often enough for him to like for the residuals to be enough money for him to live a pretty decent lifestyle.
It's a Christmas jingle.
Yeah.
And so that's why he gets so much residuals is because it plays every year.
Yeah. And I like there's moments like too, like there's a moment where he's shopping and that song plays and he's just like, oh God, why? You know, like
well, even when he told them
like
what the
it's
song
still
was.
November.
Because when he told
like,
that woman what the song was,
they're already starting.
And Marcus was there too. You hear his inner narration,
it.
He's like, oh, please don't start singing. And then immediately they start singing.
Yeah. The song itself, that becomes like another running gag throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Like the existence of that song, like as soon as it's mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of a sad story too, because like I think good Christmas movies are almost always like bittersweet.
I think like it's not like 100% stated like outright, but I think like he holds like some resentment towards his dad, like maybe over that song.
Yeah.
Or there could be other reasons too that's not stated, but I did get the feeling that he holds some sort of resentment towards his father.
I like all the background stuff about his father and his mom. It's all told. None of it's shown. But it's told like very briskly and briefly in moments. And in doing so, it's kind of subtle. And there's a lot there to like dissect, you know, like
and it's told briefly
makes him the way he is.
Yeah, it's like there's not anything shown and there's not much told because again, we're getting the story like basically through his like inner monologue, inner narration, and he's not the type of person who's going to dwell on his feelings. You know, again, he's like a very shallow person. He doesn't want to think about his feelings, and he's not going to get into that, not even with the audience, you know.
But there's a lot of things you can draw from by like just paying attention to it and going like, okay, there's something going on. Like he talks about like his mom basically making him sing the song when he was a kid, like forcing him to sing it as kind of like a way to get to his dad because his dad was only ever able to have that one hit. Yes. And the fact that, you know, he's only in his like late 30s in this movie.
Yeah.
And they never once, besides those stories or something, they never touch on his family. His family's apparently gone.
Yeah.
They never say what happened to him, if they're still alive, if he just doesn't talk to him, what's going on. Like none of that.
I got the impression that his father is dead, but
that's
no
like idea. I mean that's like it's never stated, but it feels like that.
There's one point like after he hears a song shopping, he briefly like sees his father and like a ghost who just disappears. It's a parallel to another scene, you know, where Marcus during the park scene sees a vision of his mother before he goes home and finds her in her suicide attempt, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of moments there, like the running gag and stuff. There's a lot of moments where they parallel the same things between the two characters, you know.
Yeah,
which
definitely.
I also noticed. Yeah.
There's a lot to kind of like read into.
Yes.
You know, like you could write a paper about, you know, like things that aren't stated in this movie, you know, but are very apparent by kind of like the way things happen in the movie. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's About a Boy. It's one of my favorite kind of...
It was a good movie. I enjoyed it. It was a nice breezy watch. You know, it's funny because like it's a comedy drama, but it doesn't lean too hard into either comedy or drama. You know, it doesn't try to be too wacky or zany, and it doesn't try to like be melodramatic either.
Yeah, like, it's kind of a fun coming of age story.
Yeah.
In a sense. But it's kind of interesting because it has that split. It's like one part coming of age and it's one part like coming to maturity or something.
Right, yeah. That's true. I really enjoyed it. Hugh Grant was fun in this.
Oh, I love his character in this movie so much. He's just so like, he's so shallow, but in like the funniest way.
It's a great movie. Like also like if
he's
you
like
already, mostly
benign shallow.
It's a great movie too. If you already like hated Hugh Grant, thought he was like an unbearable douchebag.
Because you see him playing that up to like exaggerated greatness. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's great. And like I said, one of the weird things for me watching it is just like, I remember when I first watched it, and I thought like, man, that kid's so weird. He's so perfect at playing such a weird and awkward kid. And then he ended up becoming this like heartthrob actor, you know? And it's just so strange, you know, like thinking about that, like, oh, that little kid from About a Boy was engaged for a while to Jennifer Lawrence, you know?
He hit the gym instead of like sitting on video games eating Cheetos.
Yeah.
It had a very different life.
By the way, like I brought it up before, but I've been watching the second season of The Great is out. And Nicholas Hoult is in that. He plays Peter, who's Catherine the Great's like husband. He's amazing in that. He's so funny. He's kind of like a brutal version of Hugh Grant's character in this movie, in that show. So like he's like this very like shallow like guy who never once had to face consequences in his life, but clearly had like a rough upbringing, like had parents that didn't care about him and stuff. So it's like there are parallels you can draw, you know, oddly enough between Hugh Grant's character in this movie and Nicholas Holt's character in The Great. But yeah, it's, if you want to see that little kid all growing up, you know, watch The Great on Hulu. It's a really funny adaptation of Catherine the Great's story. So that's it for our Advocate segment. Next week, we're going to be going back to Hawkeye, and we're going to be talking about the next two episodes. One episode's already come out that we haven't yet discussed. We'll talk about that next week, as well as next week's episode. So just like we did last week where we covered two episodes, we're going to be covering two episodes again. We just needed a little break because it was our 25th episode, and we wanted to do an episode of Advocates. We wanted to kind of focus in on a theme, and we chose holiday movies, and I'm glad we did because it was a nice little fun diversion.
Yeah, no, this was fantastic. I love doing it. I always love Advocates just because, like, just the fun of seeing, like, what you'll recommend and, like, watching it. And I don't know, I enjoy the segment. Like,
and everything we watch is pre-pandemic.
Yes. Maybe, like, next time you could recommend South Park post-COVID, and that could be that could be the post-pandemic. Well, next Advocates post-pandemic.
Yeah, pandemic-related content, yeah.
Yeah, no, let's not do that.
No, yeah, I don't want to do that either. We live around it too much already.
Yeah.
I think Advocates is fun just because it gives us a chance to, like, go back to things that we truly love, that have, like, a place to us. It's not just like it's something good we watched, but it's something that has, like, a meaning to us, and kind of like expose each other to it, the reasons why we think that's great, and kind of give, you know, each other a chance to kind of see it from a different perspective. So it's a fun segment, and I'd like to do more of it, and we'll plan on figuring that out. But we have a lot of other stuff to be covering soon. I believe we have lots of stuff coming up to cover as well. But thank you, everybody, for listening. As I said, next week, we're going to be going back to Hawkeye, which has been pretty good so far. And I enjoyed this week's episode. Have you watched this week's episode yet?
I have not. I will be watching this week's episode tomorrow or sometime this week. I
quite enjoyed it, so it'd be fun to kind of talk about that and whatever ends up coming up next week as well. So But that's it. So yeah, send us a comment. I'm at Tyson Gifford on Twitter. Will is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our website, thetotalscreen.com. You can look up our podcast OnScreen, or just look up By the Total Screen on any podcast client like iTunes, Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict, any kind of client that happens to serve podcast, you should be able to find us on. So check that out and just kind of leave a comment anywhere you can, whether it be on our SoundCloud page, on our website, on just directly through Twitter is probably the best way to reach either of us. And that's it. So leave a comment, good, bad, or indifferent, anywhere you can. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.